Snout. This talk is about negotiating cloud contracts, specifically on the AWS side. I'm Corey Quinn. I am the chief cloud economist at Duckbill. I host the Screaming in the Cloud podcast. I write the Last Week in AWS newsletter, and we help companies with managing their FinOps challenges. A good part of that, and majority these days, has been through contract negotiation, which, as I'm about to go into, can be a bit nuanced. This is not a sales pitch. It is not a vendor talk. This is me having seen tens of billions of dollars of contracts negotiated now, and I need to vent to people to at least have some perspective on what the hell it is that I do for a living. So thanks for welcoming me here today to group therapy. You will regret it. Remember, you asked me. Let's start with a truth that's going to hurt some people. Companies regularly are negotiating contracts worth $500 million or more, and they walk into the negotiation thinking that they are hot shit. They think that they can make demands. They think that their spend gives them leverage, and they walk out with the exact same terms as their last deal. Why? Because today, $500 million is basically a rounding error for AWS. They did roughly $100 billion in revenue last year, and they're continuing to climb dramatically. You're not special because increasingly nobody is. And it helps to internalize this before you start down the path of negotiating these things. Here's the brutal math for you. An overwhelming majority of AWS customers who have contracts in place get the standard deal, and that is north of $1 million a year in spend ish. And then you generally climb the discount table, ranging from what retail rate is to enterprise contracts. And that starts again at about $1 million to get a pre-approved rate card or two. And that's more or less your lot in life. When you cross around $10 million a year or $30 million over 3 years, until you get there, don't try to negotiate super hard because you're not going to get custom anything. You're going to frustrate your account manager and accomplish little else. Right around $30 million in contract value is where the strategic customer engagement or SCE team or the deal desk, that's when they start to show up on these. They've done hundreds of these as individuals, not as an org. Below that, you're dealing with your account manager. And I love account managers, but most of them have done a handful of these deals across their entire career. My account manager rotates out every 3 months or so. Presumably it's some form of hazing at AWS. So it helps to understand where you fall in this positioning because it will save you a lot of pain to go in with a realistic approach. Good Lord, I can't even slide challenges, the fun. So here's something no one really wants to talk about here. And that is that the party's sort of over here. Remember when AWS would give you an amazing deal just to get your logo on their website, and being a recognizable brand or a giant company meant you got very special treatment? That's over. Post-COVID, AWS has been systematically normalizing all of those sweetheart deals. The first health insurance company on AWS got incredible terms, presumably. COVID saw a number of name brand companies get a lifeline when they were circling the drain. But renewal after renewal, AWS starts to pull these deals back toward a median. And that doesn't happen all at once. They're not being monsters here, but the trajectory is very clear in that eventually everyone is going to pay close to market rate for their level of spend. So increasingly, unless you're doing something truly strategic and unique, and you're the darling of the industry right now, you're going to get market terms. And that's more or less the end of the story. Being big does not cut it on its own. So go into it with your eyes open because you're not going to get the Netflix circa 2012 deal going for you. That window has long since closed. So where does that leave you if you're not special? You have 3 points of leverage, and that's it. No more, no less. The first is your future growth. AWS would rather have $10 million a year for a decade than $100 million right now. They want the commitment. They're playing the long-term game here. So if you lock in your growth trajectory, they're willing to talk. The second is competition. If you've got workloads on GCP or Azure, or you're seriously considering doing that, it gets their attention because they want to box out the competition. This is your biggest lever if you actually have alternatives. Understand that you absolutely must have a viable threat here, and we will come back to this later, but it's hard to move existing workloads But doing a new workload takes basically the stroke of a whiteboard marker for you to decide that it's going to go somewhere else. And the third is your logo. They want to be able to say that you're a customer. They want you on stage at reInvent. They want case studies and press releases and executive quotes and breakfast cereal deals and floor wax. Understand that they do care about your logo, just not as much as you care about your logo. So there's some balance here. But that's it. That's the whole game. Everything you negotiate comes down to trading these three things for better economics as part of the bargain that you strike with AWS. If you don't have at least one of these things, then you're not negotiating. You are effectively just going through a dance where the outcome is preordained and they know all the steps. It leads to an interesting place. So let me give you an actual real world story here, obviously without names attached. I can tell names in some cases, or I can tell stories, but never both. But this is an entertainment company. We hit a sticking point in the negotiation where Amazon was refusing to play ball on some of the things that they were asking for. And as a part of our talking with the customer, we found that a significant portion of their spend was reasonably portable. So we asked how quickly that they could move some of this to a different provider, and they said this afternoon. Right. Are you posturing? No, literally this afternoon. So we said, cool. Let's move 40% of this workload to another provider over the next week. So inside of a week, they wound up moving $100 million a year in spend, annualized, from AWS elsewhere. And before the week was out, Amazon, for some unknown reason, was suddenly, for some reasons that are unbeknownst to us, willing to play ball again and give them everything they asked for, and kind of kicking their door off the hinges to have that conversation with them. It's not enough to threaten. You have to be willing to follow through on that threat. It must be credible, because everyone thumps their chest and threatens to move. No one does it. There is a counterexample here. We have another customer, similar size. They pay a lot to Amazon, and they have a bunch of Amazon technical account managers, or TAMs, embedded throughout the organization. This is awesome for their engineering teams because they can work in close collaboration with the provider. But when it came time to renegotiate, AWS already knew all about their plans and their architecture. So when we explored talking about competitive threats, it couldn't go anywhere because Amazon already knew that those threats would not be credible. Now, this is a delicate situation where two things can be true at once, because Amazon is your partner and you should treat them that way. But that doesn't mean that they need to know everything. Now, I also want to call out that what made this work for the first company is almost unrepeatable. It's a sort of a lightning strike. It was a specific workload of strategically important spend. They had a very credible alternative, and there were real stakes here because their business depended on this. It wasn't a bluff. It wasn't, we're evaluating our choices. It was, watch that workload evaporate and then talk to us. So there's an increasing order of impact here. You can start with empty threats. This will get you absolutely nothing. They've heard 5 of those already today. Amazon believes you might do things through the next tier where they're evaluating a new provider for net new. Like, we're doing some AI stuff. There, that's the one mention of AI that we have to have in every talk in 2025 as legally required. So we have this AI workload, and we haven't decided if it's you or if it's going to be on GCP. It's credible because they don't have that spend yet, and it could go anywhere. It's up in the air. But the best is actually proving it, and that's hard. Nothing hits quite like watching 9 figures of your spend evaporate as a negotiating tactic. But here in the real world, most of us cannot actually pull that off, nor should being able to do this become a strategic engineering objective. It is way harder than it sounds, because the only reason this company could do it is because of a strategic business consideration that changed how that workload was structured, architected, and built from day one. That is the kind of leverage that moves the needle. Being generic doesn't work. Credible threats do. Know the difference and don't sound foolish. So, when do you renegotiate a contract? Because most folks have already done one of these, or it's in place, or it's grown organically. And there are a few times where you want to consider this. The first is obviously hypergrowth, or significant growth acceleration. If you're crushing your commitment, when you hit your total contract value midway through your cycle, that's when you renegotiate. You've committed to $100 million in spend over 5 years, and you hit it in year 3. That's the time. You have fulfilled your end of the bargain you struck with Amazon. They now need to lock in all that vulnerable future spend. You have leverage here. If you're basically on track, then you're going to renew when your contract expires. You want to start that conversation roughly 6 months before expiration, because that's when they start to look back and care about these things. And if something has changed, if you've acquired a company or launched a major new product or your business model has fundamentally changed, that's a trigger regardless of when it happens. One other thing to be aware of when you're doing this is that AWS thinks in terms of total contract value over time, not annualized commitments. Understand that distinction because it changes a lot of things. So the way that the contract negotiation starts, and people often don't realize this is what's happening, is you'll get a request from AWS to share your demand plan. And this is the start of the dance, and many folks blow it because they don't see it for what it is. At AWS, nothing gets approved, nothing gets decided, and nothing even starts until they have a demand plan. It is the first conversation you will have either with the deal team or with your account manager, where the source for that can vary. And what people get wrong here is they think they need to lowball everything and hide their growth plans. This is stupid. AWS is not going to hold you to speculation. They're not going to make you commit to things you're not comfortable committing to. That is literally one of the team's core tenets. What they want is transparency. They want to understand your run rate business, the predictable stuff. They want to know about new projects, even if they're in various stages of planning. And here's why. They want to find ways to incentivize continued growth on their platform. They understand you're not going to be able to commit to something that's not fully baked. But what they can do is incentivize you to do that project quickly, to move it forward, to do it big, and to do it on AWS when you're ready. So don't play games and be transparent, but be strategic in how you frame it. And for the love of God, prepare for this before your first meeting, because nothing screams amateur hour like showing up completely unprepared for the negotiation. If you can't spot the sucker at the poker table, it's you. There's some nuanced stuff here. They're going to send you their version of your demand plan, and it's super sophisticated. They look at your usage and they slap 20% year-over-year growth across every service. And the majority of folks go, okay, sure, that looks good. Don't be most customers here. Share your forecast. Ideally 3 years, because that's what most people can plan for, but fine, shoot for the moon on a 5-year if you need to. But be strategic in how you present it. A big migration. Maybe you see that happening in year 3 instead of in year 2 when you think you're going to do it. That gives you room to accelerate it when they want concessions. If you think you're going to grow 50%, maybe show 40%. When they come back asking for a bigger commitment, you can discover additional growth that aligns perfectly with their incentives. It's funny how that works. Just please don't do the 20% across everything. That's lazy. That's what people do when they don't really understand their infrastructure. S3 usage for you might be growing at 12%, EC2 at 8%. That new data analytics workload that for some godforsaken reason uses CloudWatch logs as a database, maybe that one's 20%. The details matter here. It helps you build business cases for service-specific discounts later on. So do yourself a massive favor and understand how your top 10 services are growing before you talk to AWS. Or don't, and wonder why your deal sucks. There's one other lever that people like to forget exists, and that's publicity, because there are tiers to this. The basic line is being referenceable. They can say that you're a customer. This is boring. This is standard. If you're important enough, you might find your logo on the reInvent eye chart of customer logos they love to put up there. Next, you got preferred provider, which means in your official communications around cloud, AWS is referred to as your preferred cloud provider. That has value. And the last, of course, is exclusive, where they're your only cloud, all in on AWS. That means no GCP, no Azure that you're willing to admit to in public, and that has even more value. Then you can pile add-ons onto this. Case studies where your CTO talks about how amazing AWS is. Executive statements, press releases, speaking slots at reInvent. Apropos of absolutely nothing, the only two companies that talked on stage about deploying Trainium at reInvent last year were Anthropic and Apple. You know, Apple, the one that's famous for giving testimonials for all of their vendors. Yeah, wonder what happened there. All of this stuff has value in the negotiation. Each level up, each add-on, it does matter. Now, my advice on this, which almost no one follows, but everyone should, is to save the publicity discussion for the end. Get everything else locked down. Get your discount structure, get your commitment terms, get your rate cards, get your investment credits, and then pull out publicity. You know what? We'd be willing to do a case study if you could improve the S3 discount by another 2%, because we're doing something really interesting here. It's pure margin for you at this point. You were probably going to talk about this stuff anyway, so you may as well get paid for it. But people lead with it naively, like idiots, and then they have nothing left to trade. Don't give it away. So an increasing question we see across the board now is when that everyone asks, well, what happens if you don't miss your commit? There's a simple answer here, and it's you get a bill. AWS has started sending shortfall payments invoices, and it's not theoretical anymore. But Corey, what about COVID? AWS was flexible then. Yes, COVID, global pandemic, macroeconomic catastrophe. AWS broke all the rules because everyone was struggling. That's why, and the why matters. If you're in trouble because of circumstances beyond your control, a market crash, industry-wide disruption, alien invasion, AWS has shown that they can be flexible. They can also extend your term. Okay, in the spirit of partnership, we'll give you 6 more months to hit that number, sometimes with a small additional spend to extend the contract. But here's the critical part now. You cannot bet on this. You can't guarantee it. You can't go into a contract thinking, if we don't hit it, I'm sure they'll work with us. That's a gamble with your company's money. Don't do that without, significant executive approval. Assume that you are on the hook for every penny that you're committing to in the term that you commit to spending it. If you're not comfortable with that level of risk, don't sign the deal. I've now seen too many finance teams get surprised by shortfall bills. Don't be one of them. Let's talk about the one thing that kills more deals than anything else. Timing. The rule's simple and it's brutal. Contracts must be signed by the 20th of the month to be effective on the 1st of the following month. Not the 25th, not the 30th, the 20th. But Corey, surely there's flexibility. Stop. There is a secret extension process where you can get until month end, but it requires special approval, and your account manager internally needs to pre-negotiate the entire deal in conjunction with the deal desk and get sign off from basically God. Don't bet on it. Don't plan for it. Don't count on this. Work your internal processes and be realistic. Now, starting from scratch, the minimum realistic timeline to get a deal done is 3 months. 6 months is safer for anything big, and that is active negotiation. This is for commercial. If you're public sector, you can generally multiply everything by 3. Last time I counted noses, their deal desk for pub sector was 5 people. Every modification we've seen there takes 3 weeks, and that's not an exaggeration. And then, so you have a great call with them, and then the psychological torture starts because everyone's excited. I'll get this to the deal team right away. And then there's silence for a week. They come back and you counter immediately. And then there's silence for 10 days. This is normal. This is how it works. Every change goes through review because every modification needs approval. Start early. Start way earlier than you think you're going to need to, because the only speed that AWS knows is hurry up and wait. If you don't believe me, try and do a CloudFront deployment. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of time, so let me wrap this up with nonsense that actually matters here. The first is to know what tier you're in of spend. If you're not 10 million a year, you're getting a standard deal. Accept it. Move on with your life. You have bigger fish to fry. The second is understand your leverage. Growth, competition, and publicity are your 3 cards. Please play them wisely. The third is to use competition only if it is credible as a threat. We might use Google is worthless. This workload is going to Google unless you do X is valuable. Know the difference. Number 4, time it right. If you're hitting your total contract value early, renegotiate immediately because that's when you have power. 5, prepare your demand plan before they ask you for it. Focus on the top 10 services that you're using. Don't be the person that agrees to 20% across the board. You should also probably know what those top 10 services are. 6, start early, 6-month minimum, because the 20th of the month deadline is real and it will absolutely screw you because nobody wants to do a month of on demand. 7, assume you're on the hook for every penny. Don't bet on flexibility. Don't gamble with company money. And that's what it is. Write them down, actually follow them, and your CFO will thank you for it. So a final thought here before we wind up wrapping on this. After you sign your contract, you still have to work with these people for years. Your account manager is still going to be there, presumably. The service teams will still be there. So don't burn bridges for an extra percentage point. Their philosophy on this is dead simple. Discounts in exchange for committed spend. They are not trying to squeeze every dollar out of you this quarter. They want predictable long-term revenue. They care more about slow money over time than fast money once because they play the long game. Your leverage will not come from threats. It's going to come from understanding what you care about and what they care about, and then structuring a deal that works for both sides. This isn't a vendor relationship anymore, not as you traditionally understand that in procurement. When AWS is your second or third biggest operating expense, they become a partner. Whether you like it or not, negotiate accordingly. Or don't, and wonder why your deals don't ever seem to improve materially. It's your choice. Now, I am happy to take questions in the chat. I will hang out here for a while, but honestly, I'm more interested in hearing about your war stories. What worked that shouldn't have? What blew up in your face? What surprised you? No one talks about this, so let's learn from other people's mistakes, because God knows that I've made enough of them. Everything I've just talked about is because I've gotten it wrong at least once. So this concludes my nonsense. All right, what questions do we have hanging out in the chat?
Yeah, so we have some questions, and you can still post it over there. One is from Gregory, which is a case that is very interesting, I think, is what should we do if our contract is ending and it needs to be renewed, but our cloud usage is decreasing thanks to some projects being terminated and thanks to the FinOps team. So how do you approach this situation?
Negative growth contract. You're assuming you're not dropping below a threshold of where it's no longer eligible for discount. You'll get a worse discount at renewal time because you're committing to spend less. But they're not going to look at someone dropping 150 million bucks a year. Oh, it's dropping down to 120. Never mind. You're just paying the list price. That's not how any of it works. It comes down to having a story around it as well. You have the option, they can incentivize you to delay or defer parts of that migration off, presumably. You do have wiggle room. It's going to depend on the specific strategic picture of what's going on at your company. But there are always options. These are humans. Unlike a lot of the computer stuff, there is no API for talking to humans, at least not legally. So we can always find fun ways as people to solve these things.
Yeah,
savings plans or reservations? Yes, is the short answer to that.
There is another one about the Sourcefield bill, if it's happened in the current year or at the end of the commitment. I assume it's at the end of the commitment, right?
End of the commitment. Yes, it's depends. Read your contract. Very often there are specific shortfalls, even on specific services at checkpoints. You also have annual shortfall payments when you have specific yearly commits. Understand though that they do care more about the long term. You can see lumpy commits if you spaced out your purchasing with 3-year reservations and bulk buys, where year 1 of the contract is large, year 2 drops down, year 3 goes up again. We've seen all sorts of lumpiness there if you need that for your financials. This is where talking to them and coming up with something that makes sense. They want to make sure they're not incentivizing you to leave, but they also want to make sure that you're happy and that you're continuing to get value for what you're paying for. These are terrific questions, incidentally.
Definitely. And the one question that was above is, does someone here already had an answer when asking for the details of the auto-generated plan provided by AWS? Do you have an answer for that one?
Oh, yeah. When the answer, it's a spreadsheet. They punch in some very naive numbers and the formula in the spreadsheet spits it out. That's the auto-generated demand plan. It is 20% year over year, occasionally with some modifications because there's nothing quite as suspicious as a round number. But yeah, that is directionally how it works.
Okay. Yeah, pretty simple, actually.
There are occasions, of course, where an account manager is with the ball and decide, okay, let's be reasonable here. We have this giant, massive, steady state company that's done a flat commit for their last contract. They're not suddenly going to start growing 20% year over year. They're not fools. Usually, there are times we do wonder if, like, have you folks talked to each other?
And regarding there are a couple of questions about these principles and these notes about applying this to the other providers, so to Azure and GCP. I don't know if you can shine a light on that, or if it's
We've done some work with GCP. The challenge historically with GCP has been that AWS has this down to a science and a process. I can sit here from the start of a negotiation to the end and tell you on a week by week basis what's going to happen that week and how to handle it. And I look like a prophet from the future. I'm not, so far as we know. I've just done this a lot. Over in Google, it's still been more of a Wild West approach where the account managers tend to have a lot more autonomy. So it's a little more varied there. It is not as process driven. It is not as structured. And I don't touch Azure without gloves on because I'm not sure how that stuff spreads. So much of that is tied into consumption agreements, enterprise agreements that cover server software, client software, desktop operating systems, desktop publishing with your Office suite. And so much is licensing driven that I would not feel comfortable doing that without an attorney and a forensic accountant. And honestly, that's not where I like to play. I have a background building systems. I don't necessarily want to go and play auditor.
Cool. And one question that says is it true that you can't reduce or decommission AWS accounts by 10% over time in the master payer? This is very specific.
That you can't decommission them by 10%? Yeah, there's a rate limit on there as far as number of accounts you can turn off. And that's done as a safety feature. If you have a legitimate reason to turn off a swath of accounts, go ahead and talk to your account team. That has more to do with making sure that someone doesn't blindly blow away their entire company by mistake. That is a safeguard. That is not trap.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Makes all sense. And when negotiating a PPA with AWS, we are currently looking at the cost of support, and it is throwing out the cost for us. What is the likeliness of getting support waived?
Discounted is likelier than waived. There are very few exceptions to getting it waived. I don't know if I'd be able to pull that off. My spend is nowhere near enough to have this myself. I can't wait to negotiate my first one. It'll be a blast. But I'm going to get it waived on the grounds of, well, every time you respond to me, it starts with AI. So what's the deal here? I can run that myself for my Claude subscription. I get the sense that that'll go interestingly. They are likelier to bend on other areas. Also, don't over-index on specifics like that. It's a common mistake. Look at it in terms of total contract value. If they won't waive support, will they give you credits or in some other area that will wind up offsetting that? You have a lot of moving parts to some of these deals, depending on the complexity of your organization, and money is ultimately fungible. It's just how it gets expressed contractually.
Cool. Yeah, I think that would be very interesting. Like, how do you handle the support waiver? It could be very, very interesting to document.
And the question is, how can I move $100 million in 2 weeks with a 90-day decommission account policies? They didn't shut the accounts down. They just moved a few 100,000 instances from to other providers. This specific workload was able to be reprovisioned rapidly and dynamically almost anywhere you could throw an x86 instruction set at it.
Yeah,
so good question. But yeah, it sounds like, no, this will just turn off the environment because they also had a reasonable suspicion they would be coming back to these places. This was also a fun one. Like, so what regions are you in? Like, oh, we're in every availability zone. Like, and I start to frame, like, I can tell you're about to ask if I'm an idiot. No, we are in every AZ. Like, okay, good. Now we can have that conversation. They were not arbitrarily turning accounts off, just the expensive things inside the accounts.
Good stuff. I think that has to be something to be really seen, like how that amount of money goes from one provider to the other, definitely. And the other one, the last one is any idea on the different hierarchy steps on AWS side, starting from AM to VP or XF, if you want to negotiate and escalate in order to implicate your access, especially in a major deal. So how that the escalation process happens in a negotiation. Maybe that's the summary of the question.
One of the biggest things I see companies doing wrong is that they do not get their ducks in a row internally. You need to have a single track person that talks to AWS and represents the deal. If people start side channeling and back channeling around them, and AWS will try that, all roads need to point back to that individual person, because otherwise you're going to find that everything goes completely sideways. AWS has clear structures of responsibilities for this. Account managers often will say you're negotiating with them. By the time you are speaking with SCE, that is not true anymore. Maybe they're the one presenting things to you, but it is SCE driven. And I just have to say, I love that team. They are fun folks to work with, fun folks to hang out with. This is not me. It's not the adversarial relationship you would often think.